Chapter 17. The Soldier in White. Yossarian ran right into the hospital, determined to remain there forever rather than fly one mission more than the 32 missions he had. 10 days after he changed his mind and came out, the colonel raised the missions to 45, and Yossarian ran right back in, determined to remain in the hospital forever rather than fly one mission more than the 6 missions more he had just flown. Yossarian could run into the hospital whenever he wanted to because of his liver and because of his eyes. The doctors couldn't fix his liver condition and couldn't meet his eyes each time he told them he had a liver condition. He could enjoy himself in the hospital just as long as there was no one really very sick in the same ward. His system was sturdy enough to survive a case of someone else's malaria or influenza with scarcely any discomfort at all. He could come through other people's tonsillectomies without suffering any post-operative distress, and even endure their hernias and hemorrhoids with only a mild nausea and revulsion. But that was just about as much as he could go through without getting sick. After that, he was ready to bolt. He could relax in the hospital since no one there expected him to do anything. All he was expected to do in the hospital was die or get better, and since he was perfectly all right to begin with, getting better was easy. Being in the hospital was better than being over Bologna or flying over Avignon with Hoople and Dobbs at the controls and Snowden dying in the back. There were usually not nearly as many sick people inside the hospital as Yossarian saw outside the hospital, and there were generally fewer people inside the hospital who were seriously sick. There was a much lower death rate inside the hospital than outside the hospital, and a much healthier death rate. Few people died unnecessarily. People knew a lot more about dying inside the hospital and made a much neater, more orderly job of it. They couldn't dominate death inside the hospital, but they certainly made her behave. They had taught her manners. They couldn't keep death out, but while she was in, she had to act like a lady. People gave up the ghost with delicacy and taste inside the hospital. There was none of that crude, ugly ostentation about dying that was so common outside the hospital. They did not blow up in midair like Kraft or the dead man in Yossarian's tent, or freeze to death in the blazing summertime the way Snowden had frozen to death after spilling his secret to Yossarian in the back of the plane. "I'm cold," Snowden had whispered. "I'm cold." There, Yossarian had tried to comfort him. There. They didn't take it on the lam weirdly inside a cloud the way Clevenger had done. They didn't explode into blood and clotted matter. They didn't drown or get struck by lightning, mangled by machinery, or crushed in landslides. They didn't get shot to death in holdups, strangled to death in rapes, stabbed to death in saloons, bludgeoned to death with axes by parents or children, or die summarily by some other act of God. Nobody choked to death. People bled to death like gentlemen in an operating room or expired without comment in an oxygen tent. There was none of that tricky now you see me, now you don't business so much in vogue outside the hospital. None of that now I am, now I ain't. There were no famines or floods. Children didn't suffocate in cradles or ice boxes or fall under trucks. No one was beaten to death. People didn't stick their heads into ovens with the gas on, jump in front of subway trains, or come plummeting like dead weights out of the hotel windows with a whoosh, accelerating at a rate of 32 feet per second to land with a hideous plop on the sidewalk and die disgustingly there in public like an alpaca sack full of hairy strawberry ice cream, bleeding, pink toes awry. All things considered, Yossarian often preferred the hospital, even though it had its faults. The help tended to be officious, the rules, if heeded, restrictive, and the management meddlesome. Since sick people were apt to be present, he could not always depend on a lively young crowd in the same ward with him, and the entertainment was not always good. He was forced to admit that the hospitals had altered steadily for the worse as the war continued and one moved closer to the battlefront, the deterioration in the quality of the guests becoming most marked within the combat zone itself, where the effects of booming wartime conditions were apt to make themselves conspicuous immediately. The people got sicker and sicker the deeper he moved into combat, until finally in the hospital that last time there had been the soldier in white, who could not have been any sicker without being dead, and he soon was. The soldier in white was constructed entirely of gauze, plaster, and a thermometer, and the thermometer was merely an adornment left balanced in the empty dark hole in the bandages over his mouth early each morning and late each afternoon by Nurse Kramer and Nurse Duckett. Right up to the afternoon, Nurse Kramer read the thermometer and discovered he was dead. Now that Yossarian looked back, it seemed that Nurse Kramer, rather than the talkative Texan, had murdered the soldier in white. If she had not read the thermometer and reported what she had found, The soldier in white might still be lying there alive, exactly as he had been lying there all along, encased from head to toe in plaster and gauze, with both strange, rigid legs elevated from the hips, and both strange arms strung up perpendicularly, all four bulky limbs in casts, all four strange, useless limbs hoisted up in the air by taut wire cables, and fantastically long lead weights suspended darkly above him. Lying there that way might not have been much of a life, but it was all the life he had, and the decision to terminate it, Yossarian felt, should hardly have been Nurse Kramer's. The soldier in white was like an unrolled bandage with a hole in it, or like a broken block of stone in a harbor with a crooked zinc pipe jutting out. The other patients in the ward, all but the Texan, shrank from him with a tender-hearted aversion from the moment they set eyes on him the morning after the night he had been sneaked in. They gathered soberly in the farthest recess of the ward and gossiped about him in malicious, offended undertones, rebelling against his presence as a ghostly imposition and resenting him malevolently for the nauseating truth of which he was a bright reminder. They shared a common dread that he would begin moaning. "I don't know what I'll do if he begins moaning," the dashing young fighter pilot with the golden mustache had grieved forlornly. "It means he'll moan during the night, too, because he won't be able to tell time." No sound at all came from the soldier in white all the time he was there. The ragged round hole over his mouth was deep and jet black and showed no sign of lip, teeth, palate, or tongue. The only one who ever came close enough to look was the affable Texan, who came close enough several times a day to chat with him about more votes for the decent folk, opening each conversation with the same unvarying greeting. "What do you say, fella? How you coming along?" That was a terrible Texan accent. I forgot to do it. The rest of the men avoided them, both in their regulation maroon corduroy bathrobes and unraveling flannel pajamas, wondering gloomily who the soldier in white was, why he was there, and what he was really like inside. "He's all right, I tell you," the Texan would report back to them encouragingly after each of his social visits. "Deep down inside, he's really a regular guy. He's just feeling a little shy and insecure right now because he doesn't know anybody here and he can't talk. Why don't y'all just step right up to him and introduce yourselves? He won't hurt you." "What the goddamn hell are you talking about?" Dunbar demanded. "Does he even know what you're talking about?" "Sure he knows what I'm talking about. He's not stupid. There ain't nothing wrong with him." "Can he hear you?" "Well, I don't know if he can hear me or not, but I'm sure he knows what I'm talking about." "Does that hole over his mouth ever move?" "Now, what kind of crazy question is that?" the Texan asked uneasily. "How can you tell if he's breathing if he never moves?" "How can you tell it's a he?" Does he have pads over his eyes underneath that bandage over his face? Does he ever wiggle his toes or move the tips of his fingers?" The Texan backed away in mounting confusion. "Now, what kind of crazy question is that? You fellas must all be crazy or something. Why don't you just walk right up and get acquainted? He's a real nice guy, I tell you." The soldier in white was more like a stuffed and sterilized mummy than a real nice guy. Nurse Duckett and Nurse Kramer kept him spick and span. They brushed his bandages often with a whisk broom and scrubbed the plaster casts on his arms, legs, shoulders, chest, and pelvis with soapy water. Working in a round tin of metal polish, they waxed a dim gloss on the dull zinc pipe rising from the cement on his groin. With damp dish towels, they wiped the dust several times a day from the slim black rubber tubes leading in and out of the two large stoppered jars, one of them hanging on a post beside his bed, dripping fluid into his arm constantly through a slit in the bandages, while the other, almost out of sight on the floor, drained the fluid away through the zinc pipe rising from his groin. Both young nurses polished the glass jars unceasingly. They were proud of their housework. The more solicitous of the two was Nurse Kramer, a shapely, pretty, sexless girl with a wholesome, unattractive face. Nurse Kramer had a cute nose and a radiant, blooming complexion dotted with fetching sprays of adorable freckles that Yossarian detested. She was touched very deeply by the soldier in white. Her virtuous, pale blue, saucer-like eyes flooded with leviathan tears on unexpected occasions and made Yossarian mad. "How the hell do you know he's even in there?" he asked her. "Don't you dare talk to me that way," she replied indignantly. "Well, how do you know? You don't even know if it's really a him." "Who?" "Whoever's supposed to be in all those bandages. You might really be weeping for somebody else. How do you know he's even alive?" What a terrible thing to say, Nurse Kramer exclaimed. Now you get right into bed and stop making jokes about him. I'm not making jokes. Anybody might be in there. For all we know, it might even be Mud. What are you talking about? Nurse Kramer pleaded with him in a quavering voice. Maybe that's where the dead man is. What dead man? I got a dead man in my tent that nobody can throw out. His name is Mud. Nurse Kramer's face blanched and she turned to Dunbar desperately for aid. Make him stop saying things like that, she begged. Maybe there's no one inside, Dunbar suggested helpfully. Maybe they just sent the bandages here for a joke. She stepped away from Dunbar in alarm. You're crazy, she cried, glancing about imploringly. You're both crazy. Nurse Duckett showed up then and chased them all back to their own beds, while Nurse Kramer changed the stoppered jars for the soldier in white. Changing the jars for the soldier in white was no trouble at all, since the same clear fluid was dripped back inside him over and over again with no apparent loss. When the jar feeding the inside of his elbow was just about empty, the jar on the floor was just about full, and the two were simply uncoupled from their respective hoses and reversed quickly so that the liquid could be dripped right back into him. Changing the jars was no trouble to anyone but the men who watched them change every hour or so and were baffled by the procedure. Why can't they hook the two jars up to each other and eliminate the middleman? The artillery captain with whom Yossarian had stopped playing chess inquired. What the hell do they need him for? I wonder what he did to deserve it, the warned officer with malaria and a mosquito bite on his ass lamented after Nurse Kramer had read her thermometer and discovered that the soldier in white was dead. He went to war, the fighter pilot with the golden mustache surmised. We all went to war, Dunbar countered. That's what I mean, the warned officer with malaria continued. Why him? There just doesn't seem to be any logic to this system of rewards and punishment. Look what happened to me. If I had gotten syphilis or a dose of clap for my 5 minutes of passion on the beach instead of this damn mosquito bite, I could see some justice. But malaria? Malaria? Who can explain malaria as a consequence of fornication? The warrant officer shook his head in numb astonishment. What about me? Yossarian said. I stepped out of my tent in Marrakesh one night to get a bar of candy and even caught your dose of clap when that whack I had never even saw before hissed me into the bushes. All I really wanted was a bar of candy, but who could turn it down? That sounds like my dose of clap, all right, the warrant officer agreed. But I've still got somebody else's malaria. Just for once, I'd like to see all these things sort of straightened out, with each person getting exactly what he deserves. It might give me some confidence in this universe. I got somebody else's $300,000, the dashing young fighter captain with the golden mustache admitted. I've been goofing off since the day I was born. I cheated my way through prep school and college, and just about all I've been doing ever since is shacking up with pretty girls who think I'd make a good husband. I got no ambition at all. The only thing I want to do after the war is marry some girl who's got more money than I have and shack up with lots more pretty girls. $300,000 was left to me before I was born by a grandfather who made a fortune selling hogwash on an international scale. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll be damned if I give it back. I wonder who it really belongs to. Maybe it belongs to my father, Dunbar conjectured. He spent a lifetime at hard work and never could make enough money to even send my sister and me through college. He's dead now, so you might as well keep it. Now, if we can just find out who my malaria belongs to, we'd be all set. It's not that I've got anything against malaria. I'd just as soon gold brick with malaria as with anything else. It's only that I feel an injustice has been committed. Why should I have somebody else's malaria and you have my dose of clap? I've got more than your dose of clap, Yossarian told him. I've got to keep flying combat missions because of that dose of yours until they kill me. That makes it even worse. Where's the justice in that? I had a friend named Clevenger 2.5 weeks ago who used to see plenty of justice in it. It's the highest kind of justice of all, Clevenger had gloated, clapping his hands with a merry laugh. I can't help thinking of the Hippolytus of Euripides, where the early licentiousness of Theseus is probably responsible for the asceticism of the son that helps bring about the tragedy that ruins them all. If nothing else, That episode with the whack should teach you the evil of sexual immorality. It teaches me the evil of candy. Can't you see that you're not exactly without blame for the predicament you're in? Clevenger had continued with undisguised relish. If you hadn't been laid up in the hospital with venereal disease for 10 days back there in Africa, you might have finished your 25 missions in time to be sent home before Colonel Nevers was killed and Colonel Cathcart came to replace him. What about you? Yossarian had replied. You never got clap in Marrakesh, and you're still in the same predicament. I don't know, confessed Clevenger with a trace of mock concern. I guess I must have done something very bad in my time. Do you really believe that? Clevenger laughed. No, of course not. I just like to kid you along a little. There were too many dangers for Yossarian to keep track of. There was Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo, for example, and they were all out to kill him. There was Lieutenant Scheisskopf with his fanaticism for parades, and there was the bloated colonel with his big fat mustache and his fanaticism for retribution, and they wanted to kill him too. There was Appleby, Havermeyer, Black, and Korn. There was Nurse Kramer and Nurse Duckett, who he was almost certain wanted him dead, and there was the Texan and the CID man about whom he had no doubt. There were bartenders, bricklayers, and bus conductors all over the world who wanted him dead, landlords and tenants, traitors and patriots, lynchers, leeches, and lackeys, and they were all out to bump him off. There was the secret Snowden had spilled to him on the mission to Avignon. They were out to get him, and Snowden had spilled it all over the back of the plane. There were lymph glands that might do him in. There were kidneys, nerve sheaths, and corpuscles. There were tumors of the brain. There was Hodgkin's disease, leukemia, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. There were fertile red meadows of epithelial tissue to catch and coddle a cancer cell. There were diseases of the skin, diseases of the bone, diseases of the lung, diseases of the stomach, diseases of the heart, blood, and arteries. There were diseases of the head, diseases of the neck, diseases of the chest, diseases of the intestines, diseases of the crotch. There were even diseases of the feet. There were billions of conscientious body cells oxidating away day and night like dumb animals, their complicated job of keeping him alive and healthy. And everyone was a potential traitor and foe. There were so many diseases that it took a truly diseased mind to even think about them as often as he and Hungry Joe did. Hungry Joe collected lists of fatal diseases and arranged them in alphabetical order so that he could put his finger without delay on anyone he wanted to worry about. He grew very upset whenever he misplaced some or when he could not add to his list, and he would go rushing in a cold sweat to Dr. Nika for help. Give him Ewing's tumor, Yossarian advised Dr. Nika, who would come to Yossarian for help in handling Hungry Joe, and follow it up with melanoma. Hungry Joe likes lingering diseases, but he likes the fulminating ones even more. Dr. Nika had never heard of either. How do you manage to keep up on so many diseases like that? He inquired with high professional esteem. I learn about them in the hospital when I study the Reader's Digest. Yossarian had so many ailments to be afraid of that he was sometimes tempted to turn himself into the hospital for good and spend the rest of his life stretched out there inside an oxygen tent with a battery of specialists and nurses seated at one side of the bed 24 hours a day, waiting for something to go wrong, and at least one surgeon with a knife poised at the other, ready to jump forward and begin cutting away the moment it became necessary. Aneurysms, for instance. How else could they ever defend him in time against an aneurysm of the aorta? Yossarian felt much safer inside the hospital than outside the hospital, even though he loathed the surgeon and his knife as much as he ever loathed anyone. He could start screaming inside a hospital and people would at least come running to try to help. Outside the hospital, they would throw him in prison if he ever started screaming about all the things he felt everyone ought to start screaming about, or they would put him in the hospital. One of the things he wanted to start screaming about was the surgeon's knife that was almost certain to be waiting for him and everyone else who lived long enough to die. He wondered often how he would ever recognize the first chill, flush, twinge, ache, belch, sneeze, stain, lethargy, vocal slip, loss of balance, or lapse of memory that would signal the inevitable beginning of the inevitable end. He was afraid also that Dr. Nika would still refuse to help him when he went to him again after jumping out of Major Major's office, and he was right. You think you got something to be afraid about? Dr. Nika demanded, lifting his delicate, immaculate dark head up from his chest to gaze at Yossarian irascibly for a moment with lachrymose eyes. What about me? My precious medical skills are rusting away here on this lousy island while other doctors are cleaning up. Do you think I enjoy sitting here day after day refusing to help you? I wouldn't mind it so much if I could refuse to help you back in the States or in some place like Rome, but saying no to you here isn't easy for me either. Then stop saying no. Ground me. I can't ground you, Dr. Nika mumbled. How many times do you have to be told? Yes, you can. Major told me you're the only one in the squadron who can ground me. Dr. Nika was stunned. Major told you that? When? When I tackled him in the ditch. Major told you that? In a ditch? He told me in his office after we left the ditch and jumped inside. He told me not to tell anyone he told me, so don't start shooting your mouth off. Why, that dirty, scheming liar, Dr. Nika cried. He wasn't supposed to tell anyone. Did he tell you how I could ground you? Just by filling out a little slip of paper saying I'm on the verge of a nervous collapse and sending it to group. Dr. Stubbs grounds men in his squadron all the time, so why can't you? And what happens to the men after Stubbs does ground them? Dr. Nika retorted with a sneer. They go right back to combat status, don't they? And he finds himself right up the creek. Sure, I can ground you by filling out a slip saying you're unfit to fly, but there's a catch. Catch 22? Sure, if I take you off combat duty, group has to approve my action. And group isn't going to. They'll put you right back on combat status. And then where will I be? On my way to the Pacific Ocean, probably. No, thank you. I'm not going to take any chances for you. Isn't it worth a try? Yossarian argued. What's so hot about Pianosa? Pianosa is terrible, but it's better than the Pacific Ocean. I wouldn't mind being shipped someplace civilized where I might pick up a buck or two in abortion money every now and then, but all they've got in the Pacific is jungles and monsoons. I'd rot there. You're rotting here. Dr. Nika flared up angrily. Yeah, well, at least I'm going to come out of this war alive, which is a lot more than you're going to do. That's just what I'm trying to tell you, goddammit. I'm asking you to save my life. It's not my business to save lives, Dr. Nika replied sullenly. What is your business? I don't know what my business is. All they ever told me was to uphold the ethics of my profession and never give testimony against another physician. Listen, you think you're the only one whose life is in danger? What about me? Those two quacks I've got working for me in the medical tent still can't find what's wrong with me. Maybe it's Ewing's tumor, Yossarian muttered sarcastically. You really think so? Dr. Nika exclaimed with fright. Oh, I don't know, Yossarian answered impatiently. I just know I'm not going to fly any more missions. They wouldn't really shoot me, would they? I've got 51. Why don't you at least finish the 55 before you take a stand? Dr. Nika advised. With all your bitching, you've never finished a tour of duty even once. How the hell can I? The colonel keeps raising them every time I get close. You never finish your missions because you keep running into hospital or going off to Rome. You'd be in a much stronger position if you had your 55 finished and then refused to fly. Then maybe I'd see what I can do. Do you promise? I promise. What do you promise? I promise that maybe I'll think about doing something to help if you finish your 55 missions, and if you get to McWatt to put my name on his flight log again so that I can draw my flight pay without going up in a plane. I'm afraid of airplanes. Did you read about that airplane crash in Idaho 3 weeks ago? 6 people killed. It was terrible. I don't know why they want me to put in 4 hours flight time every month in order to get my flight pay. Don't I have enough to worry about without worrying about being killed in an airplane crash, too? I worry about airplane crashes also, Yossarian told him. You're not the only one. Yeah, but I'm also pretty worried about that Ewing's tumor, Dr. Nika boasted. Do you think that's why my nose is stuffed all the time and why I always feel so chilly? Take my pulse. Yossarian also worried about Ewing's tumor and melanoma. Catastrophes were lurking everywhere, too numerous to count. When he contemplated the many diseases and potential accidents threatening him, he was positively astounded that he had managed to survive in good health for as long as he had. It was miraculous. Each day he faced was another dangerous mission against mortality, and he had been surviving them for 28 years. Sorry, just checking the time. 18. The soldier who saw everything twice. Yossarian owed his good health to exercise, fresh air, teamwork, and good sportsmanship. It was to get away from them all that he had first discovered the hospital. When the physician education officer at Lowry Field ordered everyone to fall out for calisthenics one afternoon, Yossarian, the private, reported instead at the dispensary with what he had said was a pain in his right side. "Beat it," said the doctor on duty there, who was doing a crossword puzzle. "We can't tell him to beat it," said a corporal. "There's a new directive out about abdominal complaints. We have to keep them under observation 5 days because so many of them have been dying after we make them beat it." "All right," grumbled the doctor. "Keep him under observation 5 days and then make him beat it." They took Yossarian's clothes away and put him in a ward, where he was very happy when no one was snoring nearby. In the morning, a helpful young English intern popped in to ask him about his liver. "I think it's my appendix that's bothering me," Yossarian told him. "Your appendix is no good," the Englishman declared with jaunty authority. "If your appendix goes wrong, we can take it out and have you back on active duty in almost no time at all. But come to us with a liver complaint, and you can fool us for weeks. The liver, you see, is a large, ugly mystery to us. If you've ever eaten liver, you know what I mean. We're pretty sure today that the liver exists, and we have a fairly good idea of what it does whenever it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Beyond that, we're really in the dark. After all, what is a liver? My father, for example, died of a cancer of the liver, and he was never sick a day of his life right up to the moment it killed him. Never felt a twinge of pain. In a way, that was too bad, since I hated my father. Lust for my mother, you know." "What's an English medical officer doing on duty here?" Yossarian wanted to know. The officer laughed. "I'll tell you all about that when I see you tomorrow morning. And throw that silly ice bag away before you die of pneumonia." Yossarian never saw him again. That was one of the nice things about all the doctors at the hospital. He never saw any of them a second time. They came and went and simply disappeared. In place of the English intern the next day, there arrived a group of doctors he had never seen before to ask him about his appendix. "There's nothing wrong with my appendix," Yossarian informed them. "The doctor yesterday said it was my liver." "Maybe it is his liver," replied the white-haired officer in charge. "What does his blood count show?" "He hasn't had a blood count." "Have one taken right away. We can't afford to take chances with a patient in his condition. We've got to keep ourselves covered in case he dies." He made a notation on his clipboard and spoke to Yossarian. "In the meantime, keep that ice bag on. It's very important." "I don't have an ice bag on." "Well, get one. There must be an ice bag around here somewhere. And let someone know if the pain becomes unendurable." At the end of 10 days, a new group of doctors came to Yossarian with bad news. He was in perfect health and had to get out. He was rescued in the nick of time by a patient across the aisle who began to see everything twice. Without warning, the patient sat up in bed and shouted, "I see everything twice!" A nurse screamed and an orderly fainted. Doctors came running up from every direction with needles, lights, tubes, rubber mallets, and oscillating metal tines. They rolled up complicated instruments on wheels. There was not enough of the patient to go around, and specialists pushed forward in line with raw tempers and snapped at their colleagues in front to hurry up and give somebody else a chance. The colonel, with a large forehead and horn-rimmed glasses, soon arrived at a diagnosis. "It's meningitis," he called out emphatically, waving the others back, "although Lord knows there's not the slightest reason for thinking so." "Then why pick meningitis?" inquired a major with a suave chuckle. "Why not, let's say, acute nephritis?" "Because I'm a meningitis man, that's why, and not an acute nephritis man," retorted the colonel. "And I'm not going to give him up to any of you kidney birds without a struggle. I was here first." In the end, the doctors were all in accord. They agreed they had no idea what was wrong with the soldier who saw everything twice, and they rolled him away into a room in the corridor and quarantined everybody else in the ward for 14 days. Thanksgiving Day came and went without any fuss while Yossarian was still in the hospital. The only bad thing about it was the turkey for dinner. And even that was pretty good. It was the most rational Thanksgiving he had ever spent, and he took a sacred oath to spend every future Thanksgiving Day in the cloistered shelter of the hospital. He broke his sacred oath the very next year when he spent the holiday in a hotel room instead in intellectual conversation with Lieutenant Scheiskov's wife, who had Dory Does's dog tags on for the occasion and who henpecked Yossarian sententiously for being cynical and callous about Thanksgiving, even though she didn't believe in God just as much as he didn't. I'm probably just as good an atheist as you are, she speculated boastfully, but even I feel that we all have a great deal to be thankful for, and that we shouldn't be ashamed to show it. Name one thing I've got to be thankful for, Yossarian challenged her without interest. Well, Lieutenant Scheiskov's wife mused and paused a moment to ponder dubiously. Me? Oh, come on, he scoffed. She arched her eyebrows in surprise. Aren't you thankful for me? She asked. She frowned peevishly, her pride wounded. I don't have to shack up with you, you know, she told him with cold dignity. My husband has a whole squadron full of aviation cadets who would be only too happy to shack up with their commanding officer's wife just for the added fillip it would give them. Yossarian decided to change the subject. Now you're changing the subject, he pointed out diplomatically. I'll bet I can name 2 things to be miserable about for every one you can name to be thankful for. Be thankful you've got me, she insisted. I am, honey, but I'm also goddamn good and miserable that I can't have Dory Does again, too, or the hundreds of other girls and women I'll see and want in my short lifetime and won't be able to go to bed with even once. Be thankful for you're healthy. Be bitter you're not going to stay that way. Be glad you're even alive. Be furious you're going to die. Things could be much worse, she cried. They could be one hell of a lot better, he answered heatedly. You're naming only one thing, she protested. You said you could name 2. And don't tell me God works in mysterious ways, Yossarian continued, hurtling on over her objections. There's nothing so mysterious about it. He's not working at all. He's playing, or else he's forgotten all about us. That's the kind of God you people talk about. A country bumpkin, a clumsy, bungling, brainless, conceited, uncouth hayseed. Good God, how much reverence can you have for a supreme being who finds it necessary to include such phenomena as phlegm and tooth decay in his divine system of creation? What in the hell world was running through that warped, evil, scatological mind of his when he robbed old people of the power to control their bowel movements? Why in the world did he ever create pain? Pain? Lieutenant Scheiskov's wife pounced upon the word victoriously. Pain is a useful symptom. Pain is a warning to us of bodily dangers. And who created the dangers? Yossarian demanded. He laughed caustically. Oh, he was really being charitable when he gave us pain. Why couldn't he have used a doorbell instead to notify us? Or one of his celestial choirs? Or a system of blue and red neon tubes right in the middle of each person's forehead? Any jukebox manufacturer with his salt could have done that. Why couldn't he? People would certainly look silly walking around with red neon tubes in the middle of their foreheads. They certainly look beautiful now, writhing in agony or stupefied with morphine, don't they? What a colossal, immortal blunderer. When you consider the opportunity and power he had to really do a job, and then look at the stupid, ugly little mess he made of it instead, his sheer incompetence is almost staggering. It's obvious he never met a payroll. Why, no self-respecting businessman would hire a bungler like him as even a shipping clerk. Lieutenant Scheiskov's wife had turned ashen in disbelief and was ogling him with alarm. You better not talk that way about him, honey, she warned him reprovingly in a low, hostile voice. He might punish you. Isn't he punishing me enough? Yossarian snorted resentfully. You know, we mustn't let him get away with it. Oh, no. We certainly mustn't let him get away scot-free for all the sorrow he cost us. Someday I'm going to make him pay. I know when. On Judgment Day. Yes, that's the day I'll be close enough to reach out and grab that little yokel by his neck and... Stop it! Stop it! Lieutenant Scheiskov's wife screamed suddenly and began beating him ineffectually about the head with both fists. Stop it! Yossarian ducked behind his arm for protection while she slammed away at him in feminine fury for a few seconds, and then he caught her determinedly by the wrists and forced her gently back down on the bed. What the hell are you getting so upset about? He asked her bewilderedly in a tone of contrite amusement. I thought you didn't believe in God. I don't, she sobbed, bursting violently into tears. But the God I don't believe in is a good God, a just God, a merciful God. He's not the mean and stupid God you make him out to be. Yossarian laughed and turned her arms loose. Let's have a little more religious freedom between us, he proposed obligingly. You don't believe in the God you want to, and I won't believe in the God I want to. Is that a deal? That was the most illogical Thanksgiving he could ever remember spending, and his thoughts returned wishfully to his halcyon 14-day quarantine in the hospital the year before. But even that idyll had ended on a tragic note. He was still in good health when the quarantine period was over, and they told him again that he had to get out and go to war. Yossarian sat up in bed when he heard the bad news and shouted, I see everything twice! Pandemonium broke loose in the ward again. The specialists came running up from all directions and ringed him in a circle of scrutiny so confining that he could feel the humid breath from their various noses blowing uncomfortably upon the different sectors of his body. They went snooping into his eyes and ears with tiny beams of light, assaulted his legs and feet with rubber hammers and vibrating forks, drew blood from his veins, held everything handy up for him to see on the periphery of his vision. The leader of this team of doctors was a dignified, solicitous gentleman who held one finger up directly in front of Yossarian and demanded, How many fingers do you see? 2, said Yossarian. How many fingers do you see now? Asked the doctor, holding up 2. 2, said Yossarian. And now how many? Asked the doctor, holding up none. 2, said Yossarian. The doctor's face wreathed with a smile. By Jove, he's right, he declared jubilantly. He does see everything twice. They rolled Yossarian away on a stretcher to the room with the other soldier who saw everything twice and quarantined everyone else in the ward for another 14 days. I see everything twice, the soldier who saw everything twice shouted when they rolled Yossarian in. I see everything twice, Yossarian shouted back at him just as loudly with a secret wink. The walls! The walls! The other soldier cried. Move back the walls! The walls! The walls! Yossarian cried. Move back the walls! One of the doctors pretended to shove the wall back. Is that far enough? The soldier who saw everything twice nodded weakly and sank back on his bed. Yossarian nodded weakly too, eyeing his talented roommate with great humility and admiration. He knew he was in the presence of a master. His talented roommate was obviously a person to be studied and emulated. During the night, his talented roommate died, and Yossarian decided that he had followed him far enough. I see everything once, he cried quickly. A new group of specialists came pounding up to his bedside with their instruments to find out if it was true. How many fingers do you see? Asked the leader, holding up 1. 1. The doctor held up 2 fingers. How many fingers do you see now? 1. The doctor held up 10 fingers. And now how many? 1. The doctor turned to the other doctors with amazement. He does see everything once, he exclaimed. We made him all better. And just in time, too, announced the doctor with whom Yossarian next found himself alone, a tall, torpedo-shaped, congenial man with an unshaven growth of brown beards and a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket that he chain-smoked insouciantly as he leaned against the wall. There are some relatives here to see you. Oh, don't worry, he added with a laugh. Not your relatives. It's the mother, father, and brother of that chap who died. They've traveled all the way from New York to see a dying soldier, and you're the handiest one we've got. What are you talking about? Yossarian asked suspiciously. I'm not dying. Of course you're dying. We're all dying. Where the devil else do you think you're heading? They didn't come to see me, Yossarian objected. They came to see their son. They'll have to take what they can get. As far as we're concerned, one dying boy is just as good as any other, or just as bad. To a scientist, all dying boys are equal. I have a proposition for you. You let them come in and look at you over for a few minutes, and I won't tell anyone you've been lying about your liver symptoms. Yossarian drew back from him farther. You know about that? Of course I do. Give us some credit. The doctor chuckled amiably and lit another cigarette. How do you expect anyone to believe you have a liver condition if you keep squeezing the nurse's tits every time you get a chance? You're going to have to give up sex if you want to convince people you've got an ailing liver. That's a hell of a price to pay just to keep alive. Why didn't you turn me in if you knew I was faking? Why the devil should I? Asked the doctor with a flicker of surprise. We're all in this business of illusion together. I'm always willing to lend you a helping hand to a fellow conspirator along the road to survival if he's willing to do the same for me. These people have come a long way, and I'd rather not disappoint them. I'm sentimental about old people. But they came to see their son. They came too late. Maybe they won't even notice the difference. Suppose they start crying. They probably will start crying. That's one of the reasons they came. I'll listen outside the door and break it up if it starts getting tacky. It all sounds a bit crazy, Yossarian reflected. What do they want to watch their son die for anyway? I've never been able to figure that one out, the doctor admitted, but they always do. Well, what do you say? All you've got to do is lie there a few minutes and die a little. Is that asking so much? All right, Yossarian gave in. If it's just for a few minutes and you promise to wait outside. He warmed to his role. Say, why don't you wrap a bandage around me for effect? That sounds like a splendid idea, applauded the doctor. They wrapped a batch of bandages around Yossarian. A team of medical orderlies installed tan shades on each of the windows and lowered them to douse the room in depressing shadows. Yossarian suggested flowers, and the doctor sent an orderly out to find 2 small bunches of fading ones with a strong and sickening smell. When everything was in place, they made Yossarian get back into bed and lie down. Then they admitted the visitors. The visitors entered uncertainly as though they felt they were intruding, tiptoeing in with stares of meek apology. First the grieving mother and father, then the brother, a glowering, heavy-set sailor with a deep chest. The man and woman stepped into the room stiffly, side by side, as though right out of a familiar, though esoteric, anniversary daguerreotype on a wall. They were both short, sere, and proud. They seemed made of iron and old, dark clothing. The woman had a long, brooding oval face of burnt umber, with coarse graying black hair parted severely in the middle, and combed back austerely behind her neck without curl, wave, or ornamentation. Her mouth was sullen and sad, her lined lips compressed. The father stood very rigid and quaint in a double-breasted suit with padded shoulders that were much too tight for him. He was broad and muscular on a small scale and had a magnificently curled silver mustache on his crinkled face. His eyes were creased and rheumy, and he appeared tragically ill at ease as he stood awkwardly with the brim of his black felt fedora held in his 2 brawny laborer's hands, out in front of the wide lapels. Poverty and hard work had inflicted iniquitous damage on both. The brother was looking for a fight. His round white cap was cocked in an insolent tilt. His hands were clenched, and he glared at everything in the room with a scowl of injured truculence. The 3 creaked forward timidly, holding themselves close to each other in stealthy funereal grip and inching forward almost in step, until they arrived at the side of the bed and stood staring down at Yossarian. There was a gruesome and excruciating silence that threatened to endure forever. Finally, Yossarian was unable to bear it any longer and cleared his throat. The old man spoke at length. He looks terrible, he said. He's sick, Pa. Giuseppe, said the mother, who had seated herself in a chair with her veinous fingers clasped in her lap. My name is Yossarian, Yossarian said. His name is Yossarian, Ma. Yossarian, don't you recognize me? I'm your brother John. Don't you know who I am? Sure I do. You're my brother John. He does recognize me. Pa, he knows who I am. Yossarian, here's Papa. Say hello to Papa. Hello, Papa, said Yossarian. Hello, Giuseppe. His name's Yossarian, Pa. I can't get over how terrible he looks, the father said. He's very sick, Pa. The doctor said he's going to die. I didn't know whether to believe the doctor or not, the father said. You know how crooked those guys are. Giuseppe, the mother said again in a soft, broken chord of muted English. His name's Yossarian, Ma. She don't remember things too good anymore. How they treating you here, kid? They treating you pretty good? Pretty good, Yossarian told him. That's good. Just don't let anybody in here push you around. You're just as good as anybody else in here, even though you are Italian. You've got rights, too. Yossarian winced and closed his eyes so that he would not have to look at his brother John. He began to feel sick. Now see how terrible he looks, the father observed. Giuseppe, said the mother again. Ma, his name's Eucerion, the brother interrupted her impatiently. Can't you remember? It's all right, Eucerion interrupted him. She can call me Giuseppe if she wants to. Giuseppe, she said to him. Don't worry, Eucerion, the brother said. Everything's going to be all right. Don't worry, Ma, Eucerion said. Everything's going to be all right. Did you have a priest? Brother wanted to know. Yes, Eucerion lied, wincing again. That's good, the brother decided. Just as long as you're getting everything you've got coming to you. We came all the way from New York. We were afraid we wouldn't get here in time. In time for what? In time to see you before you died. What difference would it make? We didn't want you to die by yourself. What difference would it make? He must be getting delirious, the brother said. He keeps saying the same thing over and over again. That's really very funny, the old man replied. All the time I thought his name was Giuseppe, and now I find out his name is Eucerion. That's really very funny. Ma, make him feel good, the brother urged. Say something to cheer him up. Giuseppe. It's not Giuseppe, Ma. It's Eucerion. What difference does it make? The mother answered in the same mourning tone without looking up. He's dying. Her tumid eyes filled with tears, and she began to cry, rocking back and forth slowly in her chair with her hands lying in her lap like fallen moths. Eucerion was afraid she would start wailing. The father and brother began crying also. Eucerion remembered suddenly why they were all crying, and he began crying too. And a doctor Eucerion had never seen before stepped inside the room and told the visitors courteously that they had to go. The father drew himself up formally to say goodbye. Giuseppe, he began. Eucerion, corrected the son. Eucerion, said the father. Giuseppe, corrected Eucerion. Soon you're going to die. Eucerion began to cry again. The doctor threw him a dirty look from the rear of the room, and Eucerion made himself stop. The father continued solemnly with his head lowered. When you talk to the man upstairs, he said, I want you to tell him something for me. Tell him it ain't right for people to die when they're young. I mean it. Tell him if they got to die at all, they got to die when they're old. I want you to tell him that. I don't think he knows it ain't right because he's supposed to be good, and he's been going on for a long, long time, okay? And don't let anybody up there push you around, the brother advised. You'll be just as good as anybody else in heaven, even though you are Italian. Dress warm, said the mother, who seemed to know. Thus ends chapter 18.